Howdy. I'm Raymond Robertson. I'm the director of the Mosbacher Institute at the Bush School of Government and Public Service, and it's really an honor for me to welcome you all here today. This is our first in-person talk that we've done, so it has that extra celebratory aspect to it. And this is the first in-person talk that we've held in our Other Side of the Border, Ties That Bind and Issues That Divide speaker series following practitioners that work on the border, Mexico, Latin America, and other related issues. In earlier Zoom talks in this series, we've heard from a Bolivian environmental activist, a former border czar, and an immigration attorney, which, if you've missed them and you'd like to see them, they're all recorded and all available on the Mosbacher Institute website under the Borders and Migration Program. So please, if you haven't seen those, check those out. They all went really, really well. And today in this talk, we're extremely excited to hear from author and journalist Alfredo Corchado, who had many experiences reporting along the border and in Mexico. But first, I would really like to introduce and thank Assistant Professor Eileen Teague, who is the series organizer in collaboration with the Mosbacher Institute's Border and Migration Program. This Border and Migrations Program is a recent initiative that we've launched with the objective of producing rigorous research on the origins and impacts on migration and economic border flows, and enhancing evidence-driven policymaking and community engagement. We're promoting multidisciplinary research to achieve these objectives, and we're really thrilled to have affiliated faculty from all around the campus, including sociology, political science, economics, law, and others, and some of whom are here today. Manuel, good to see you. Dr. Eileen Teague joined the Bush School's Department of International Affairs as an assistant professor in the fall of 2020. She previously held a postdoctoral fellowship at Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, and she earned her PhD in history from Vanderbilt University in 2018. Born in Colón, Panama, she traveled the world as part of a military family and served in the U.S. Marine Corps from 2006 to 2014. So happy birthday, Eileen, as well. She teaches classes on American history and the U.S. relations with Mexico and Latin America, as well as thematic courses addressing issues such as interventionism, drug enforcement, national security, and addiction in U.S. society. Eileen enjoys providing a voice on how history has shaped current social and political issues, and it is a real honor for us at the Mosbacher Institute to consider her part of our family. We'd like to now welcome Professor Eileen Teague. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raymond. Welcome to everyone to our first in-person meeting of the Other Side of the Border, Ties That Bind, Issues That Divide, where, as Raymond said, we engage practitioner perspectives, particularly those working on the border, Mexico and Latin America. I'm not going to go through the whole spiel in terms of taking you through all of the people that we've hosted so far, but all I can say is that it's really energized our program here, our growing program for the study of U.S.-Latin America relations. I'm grateful to the support of many of you who supported us during our pilot run last spring in the cold days of COVID. And this year, the series has been fortunate enough to enjoy support from both the Mosbacher Institute. I want to send out a particular thank you to Ms. Cindy Gauze and Ms. Jennifer Moore for your help in putting all of these events together. We're so grateful. As well as from Texas A&M's Carlos H. Cantu Hispanic Education and Opportunity Endowment, and that assistance was facilitated by our colleagues in the College of Liberal Arts. So thank you so much for all the support. The objective of this series from the outset has been to highlight practitioner perspectives, that is, people involved in executing policy and its human impacts. We architected the series to run in lockstep with our growing Latin America concentration here in the Bush School, and because of that, earlier today, our students were able to sit down with Alfredo Corchado, who I'll introduce in just a moment, to talk about his recent book, Homelands, Four Friends, Two Countries, and the Fate of the Great Mexican-American Migration, which was published in 2019. U.S.-Mexico immigration is only one of a host of topics that Alfredo has covered as the border and Mexico correspondent for the Dallas Morning News. He is a noted expert on Mexico's democratic challenges, drug violence, and bilateral relations. Over the years, he has exposed government corruption and the reach of Mexican traffickers into U.S. communities, sometimes at great risk to his personal safety. Alfredo has described the perils that journalists face and their disturbing results, which include an increasingly silent Mexican press. Howard Campbell, author of The Drug War Zone, has called Corchado the top American journalist covering Mexico today. Born in Durango, Mexico, Alfredo grew up in California and in Texas. As a reporter for U.S. newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal, he's written about the plight of immigrants and their perilous journey to the United States. Corchado is a graduate of the University of Texas at El Paso and a recipient of numerous accolades, including a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard, a Rockefeller Fellowship, and a Maria Moores Cabot Award from Columbia University School of Journalism, awarded for extraordinary bravery and enterprise. In addition to Homelands, Alfredo is the author of Midnight in Mexico, A Reporter's Journey Through a Country's Descent into Darkness, which was published in 2013 as I was doing my fieldwork in Mexico, and this is when I was first drawn to his work. Although Corchado's areas of expertise span the gamut of important topics in U.S.-Mexico and U.S.-Latin America relations, the focus of the discussion today is going to be largely on security issues involving Mexico and the border. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm incredibly excited to introduce Alfredo Corchado. I'm going to pass the floor to him in just 1 second for a few opening remarks, but a few tidbits on admin and logistics in terms of submitting your questions. The way that first we're gonna have a little bit of a dialogue, question and answer between the two of us, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from you. We are trying a new method of question submission and would welcome your feedback, especially if you're having trouble submitting your question. You are invited to submit questions by using your personal device to scan the QR code on the programs that were distributed to you when you came in here. I'll be tracking the questions through my device up here in real time. If you have any trouble submitting your questions, feel free to talk with the Bush School ambassadors at the back, and they will be happy to help you out. So with that, I welcome Alfredo Corchado to speak with us here at the Bush School.
Jump in. I want to thank Texas A&M, the Bush School for the invitation, and Jennifer, Cindy, especially you, Eileen, for the invitation. Raymond, thank you. And I think we're ready to just jump in, no?
Let's get to it.
I just want to say, I mean, the ironic thing here is that security violence was the main issue for most of my career in journalism. I try to stay away from. And this is what the topic is tonight. My mother would be horrified.
Well, Alfredo, let's just jump right in. The name of your first book that I've been such a fan of for a number of years, Midnight in Mexico, published in 2013, was so transformative in terms of describing the security situation that we see in Mexico. And I'm wondering, how has security changed since you wrote that book? Is it still midnight? And where do you think Mexico is today?
That's the worrisome part, is that I don't know that anyone really knows what the plan is, what the plan heading forward. Is it midnight in Mexico? I think Mexico kind of started moving to maybe the 1 a.m. hour, but I feel like we're back at midnight. I mean, the last couple of years, the average has been 34,000 murders across the country. I think last year there was a slight dip. The challenge is you have 250,000 arms, weapons that are smuggled into Mexico every year, most of them through Texas. The challenging part, I think, is that there seemed to be a plan 2008, 2009, where the country was trying to build institutions, build, embolden, strengthen the rule of law. The problem today is I don't see that. I don't see institution building. I see more and more the role of the military playing a much greater role. But unfortunately, you're seeing the military also being used mostly for migration reasons, to stop the migration coming from Central America and really all over the world. So even though they're playing a bigger role, their focus has been migration. And I think as journalists, we've kind of taken the focus from the security situation in Mexico. And we're so focused on migration, mostly because that's the main issue in the United States. So I think, even, for example, the immigration officials, the top immigration officials in Mexico, it's not run by a military member. So that kind of gives you a sense as to, what the focus, what the priorities are in Mexico today. It's mostly migration at the behest of the U.S. government.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're definitely going to get back to these security issues in just a second, but I wanted to also ask you to comment on the fact that in September, we all saw horrific images of thousands of Haitians underneath the Del Rio Ciudad Acuña International Bridge. How did these thousands of Haitians get to the border, and what does that say about security in Mexico? And I'm just wondering if you can kind of take us through that journey and perhaps how that has differed from previous caravans, migrant caravans that we've seen in the past.
Sure, and what does that say about U.S. Mexico cooperation, intelligence, intelligence sharing? The fact is, and I don't have the numbers on me, but September 1st of this year, there were about less than 10 Haitians underneath the bridge in Del Rio. And then as the weeks went by, the numbers just grew and grew and grew. The majority of the Haitians arrived between the 12th and the 18th of September, which coincides with Mexican Independence Week. That's the big celebrations in Mexico. It's Cinco de Mayo is not the day. It's actually 16 de septiembre. But you had 30,000 people headed for the U.S.-Mexico border, for Acuña del Rio. 15,000 arrived. Experts have calculated that they were using over 240 buses during that time frame. How do you get 15,000 Haitians, and again, it was supposed to be 30,000, to move from Chiapas all the way to Ciudad Acuña in the span of a week? And so, talking to sources in the U.S. government, talking to sources in the Mexican government, it seemed to be a coordinated effort. Was it corrupt Mexican authorities, or was it authorities that just kind of looked the other way, or was it a Mexican government that was really overwhelmed by so many Haitians, so many migrants arriving in Chiapas? Days before that, there had been failed efforts to try to get caravans going, and we saw images of Mexican immigration authorities, in some cases beating the Haitians, and that was a big embarrassment for the Mexican government to see these images go worldwide. So there is a sense that maybe they wanted to just relieve that space, relieve that area. It also happened to be that a week, I think it was the 25th, 24th of September, top Biden administrations were in Mexico City to negotiate a security cooperation known as the Mérida Initiative. It became the bicentennial. So the other theory was this Mexico's way of reminding the United States, hey, we have leverage too. We know you want migration. We want a different security cooperation agreement. It's like a lot of things in Mexico. I mean, fascinating, a lot of theories, but in the end, you had 15,000 Haitians underneath the Ciudad Acuña and Del Rio Bridge. Also, why did they pick Ciudad Acuña? Ciudad Acuña is a place that it's organized by the remnants of the Zetas, a paramilitary group, a cartel group that you can't give 15,000 people going into this route without members of organized crime saying it's okay, you know. So it raises all kinds of questions about the security situation in Mexico, and the pressures that are being built in the South. Even as we talk today, there are thousands of people who are coming through the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, headed this way, which again gets more to the broader question of migration. But also in these days, I mean, migration and organized crime are so embedded that you can't really talk about organized crime now and say, you know, they're bringing in drugs. I mean, it's extortions, human trafficking, obviously, kidnappings, so on and on and on.
Can I ask you to comment real quick? I mean, as you see it right now, who are the most powerful, which are the most powerful cartels in Mexico? And has that changed much in the last, and how has it changed in the last 5 to 10 years?
When I was writing Midnight in Mexico, I think the number of cartels was maybe 6 major groups, 5, 6 major groups. Today, we're looking at more than 100 groups. I mean, so we've seen the splintering of these very powerful groups into smaller groups. But I think by far the most powerful would have to be the Sinaloa cartel. Yeah, from Sinaloa, this is the organization that Chapo Guzman once helped run. The most violent and the one that's making more moves, I mean, they're aggressively taking over territories, is the Jalisco generation. Jalisco Nueva Generación, a new generation Jalisco. And you see the power, I mean, again, going back to Midnight in Mexico, what's different now is that back then, you know, the territories that were mainly threatened were northern cities, like Tijuana and Ciudad Juárez, Nuevo Laredo. I mean, you could always look at the numbers, look at the stats, and these cities were always at the top. I never imagined that a city like León or Celaya would make the top 5. I mean, León, El Bajío in general, we call El Corazón de México, the heart of Mexico, was always the region that most Mexicans wanted to emulate. They wanted to become part of the middle class in Mexico, and that's where it's at. I mean, I think a lot of you know where San Miguel de Allende is. It's not that San Miguel is being targeted, so I'm not trying to create any fears here. But that whole region in general was the place that was considered the safest, that had the most potential for growth. I was in León, Silao, just a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a source. I said, "Look, I'm trying to look at the situation. Why? Because this really matters to Texas. I mean, all the big auto plants." With offices, with factories in Texas, especially North Texas, the Dallas area, the Plano area, Arlington. Their headquarters, I mean, they have giant operations in Mexico, in the León, Paseo Grande region. So it's a really important economically, you know, it's the engine. I call it El Corazón de México, but some people call it the heart of the automotive industry in Mexico. And so I'm calling up a source and I say, what should I be watching? What should I be looking for as I'm reporting this story? And he was saying, stay away from vehicles, from white Tacoma trucks. And I said, why is that? He said, that's their favorite vehicle that these people travel on. And the phone is on speakerphone, and I'm next to me is the driver, Samuel, who's been with me for years. And part of the conversation was in Spanish. And Samuel looks at me and he says, and I look around, and there's white Tacoma trucks right around us. And I mean, it just gives you a sense. I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough how León and Silao, Celaya were some of the most peaceful, quiet areas in Mexico. And to see this in the top 5 is really chilling.
I mean, as a historian, I kind of want to ask you this question about kind of taking the long view of the border. And it just seems that the media swoop in to cover some of these stories and then that come on with the most recent caravan or migration. And then all of a sudden you don't really hear about Mexico or the border too much anymore. I mean, you've been at this for a long time. I mean, you've covered and you've seen the border react to, for example, 1985 when DEA agent Enrique Camarena was murdered, through 9/11 and the national security policies that have changed since then. And I'm just wondering, taking the long view of the border, what periods stand out, and is this a unique moment in which we're living right now?
Very unique moment. I mean, just to kind of put it in historical context, I mean, I came of age on the border. I grew up in California. My parents moved to El Paso in the late 70s, early 80s. President George Bush, you know, I mean, he's really the author of NAFTA. I mean, NAFTA was, that was the big accomplishment. And I think we felt as people, residents of the border, that somehow we were thrust into this very positive role, that somehow border residents would become the bridge between two countries, that we would be able to sort of educate the rest of the United States, educate Mexico of the importance of being border residents. That obviously didn't go so well. And I think since 9/11, it's been fear, fear, fear. You know, none of the terrorists came through the southern border. None came through the U.S.-Mexico border. But yet the way the border's been portrayed is this, you know, criminals running amok. It's this, basically a land with no authority. I mean, people can just go back and forth. And that's just not true. I mean, I come from a region that's, you know, among the safest communities in this country. Whether it's El Paso, whether it's San Diego, Laredo, Presidio. I was just in Presidio, and I asked the police chief, I said, when was the last homicide in Presidio, Texas? And he said, 3 years ago. And I said, what's the homicide that really sticks out here? Thinking, you know, in those 23 years. And he says, that was 24 years ago. 1 year, one more year, in Redford, Texas. And that was a killing of his brother, Ezequiel Hernandez. Ezequiel's brother, Margarito, is now the police chief. I mean, that gives you a sense of the security, of how safe the U.S. communities are along the border. And so I completely agree with your criticism about the media. I'm a member of the media, but I'm also a border resident, and that really weighs heavily on my mind that, you know, what we call parachute journalism. You go in, there's a crisis, there's a conflict, and you got to cover that. But I also remind people that since 9/11, the worry has been about the enemy coming from outside the United States. And in that time, since 9/11, the biggest violence happened in El Paso on August 3rd, 2019, when a 20-year-old from North Texas drove 600 miles, 9-hour drive, to kill Mexicans to stop the invasion of the United States. And shot close to 40 people. About 24 of them were either Mexican or Mexican Americans. I mean, that kind of gives you a sense of how distorted the reality is about who we are and what we are along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Earlier today, we talked about the capabilities of Mexican police forces, be it the military or the federal police, local and state police, and their ability or inability to to measure up to the cartels and the cartels' resources, their weapons in particular. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that in terms of the ability of Mexican security forces to confront the security threat of the cartels and what sorts of struggles Mexican security forces face.
Again, I mean, there's no institutional building. There's no real training. There's no continuity. Every 3 years, there's a mayoral election in Mexico. So people come in and then they start all over again. And then 3 years later, there's a presidential election. And so new policies take effect. There's no real effort that I see in trying to really build up a police force, in trying to build community or build trust within the community. I've covered many massacres where the last thing you want to see at a place where the massacre just happened was the police force or the military, because they're usually accused of being behind the killings. And at this conversation with the students today, I was talking about the massacre in Ciudad Juarez. This is a Villa Salvarcar birthday party massacre, when about 40 students were celebrating the fact that they had just won a baseball tournament.
When did this happen, Alfredo?
This happened in late January, I think it was January 31st of 2010.
Okay.
And I had just come back from fellowships. I was in the Northeast. And so I was a little green, you know. You come back from a two-year leave of absence, you're writing the book and this and that. And then I remember I was at the gym that morning when I get a call and they tell me there's a big massacre in Ciudad Juarez. If you cover the border, you know, you hear that a lot. There's a massacre here, there's a massacre there. So I said, well, should we go later this afternoon or tomorrow? And my colleague, Angela Cocherga, who was also a TV reporter at the time, said, I think this one's serious. This is different. We ended up going to Ciudad Juarez, where the massacre happened at about midnight. So that's why, you know, I don't know if it's the 31st or February the 1st. And there was still blood coming out of the house where this massacre took place. We started covering it, and I remember the police and the military, I mean, they were staying away. They did not want to be near that area. I mean, I still get choked up thinking about it, but the only good news for reporters that day was that it was raining, and a lot of us were holding back our tears or really crying at the time. But what happened out of that massacre is that the parents had a chance to go to the United States and seek asylum. And the attorney said, you know, you have a legitimate case to seek asylum. Their reaction was, we want to stay in Juarez, and we want to fight and build community with the blood of our children. And that was a very powerful statement. And out of that hopeless situation, you had the community working with police. I mean, they were having meetings, they were having like weekly meetings to try to help one another. And I kind of felt, you know, because I cover this very closely. I went to some of the meetings and I thought, wow, something is really growing here. That ended, you know, with the new administration. And then, I mean, now we're talking about 11 years ago. So I think the will from the people, from the community is there. But again, I see a big disconnect between the community and those you know, powers that be.
I want to talk a little bit about U.S.-Mexico relations. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that the U.S. at different points in time under President Trump and now under President Biden wants Mexico to take certain measures to stop migration coming through Mexico. What do you think that Mexico needs from the United States?
It depends on the administration. I think, but this administration.
What does Mexico need from the United States right now?
I mean, the current administration would not agree with me or with a lot of other people who've been covering this for a long time. But the reason why the current administration did not want the immediate initiative, which was the security cooperation agreement during the Bush administration, Bush-Calderon administration, Felipe Calderon, who was the president in 2008, was that he felt that there was too much U.S. meddling in Mexico. There were too many CIA agents in the country. There was too much FBI along the border, the DEA, etc. And he just felt that they needed to basically push the United States away. I think in part, that has left for a much more vulnerable Mexican, a much more vulnerable country in which the cartels have just become much more emboldened over the years. I think a lot of critics of López Obrador would say, Mexico needs a lot more training, a lot more help in building up institutions and in building up really a rule of law. But going back to the original question, the current president's policy is abrazos, no balazos, hugs, not bullets. And that is not really selling well in many parts of Mexico.
I wanted to ask a little bit more of a personal question, especially reporting on these massacres and what is essentially the border and many moments in time has been a conflict zone. And I imagine it is at times physically and emotionally taxing. I'm wondering what keeps you going with respect to this work, even just personally, and have you become hardened by the violence or the treatment of migrants and their children? And how do you let this not become something that you're sort of inured to?
I can be flippant and say, a good tequila helps at the end of the day. But it's been hard. It's been really, really difficult. But I think that journalism, for me, storytelling, telling people stories, is really what keeps me going. Is that sometime amid the darkest moment, you find a little light in telling someone's story, in someone's story being able to captivate or move people. And that's been, even for me, August 3rd, the Walmart shooting, we took a year, the Morning News did, to do a project and try to figure out, what happened, why did it happen, etc. And I remember the Morning News kept telling me, you should maybe get some help, go see a therapist or someone, because this is, they could tell this was really affected me. But I think my therapy was really in investigating that story and in really, going back and understanding it. I think that's a beauty of journalism, is you're able to, release a lot of the emotion. I'm sure that someday, that someone sits next to me, they're going to say, you have PTSD, and it's probably true. Covering this, the violence in Mexico, getting a death threat, being able, having to force to leave the country, be out of the country. All that, I'm sure, as will have an impact when I, whenever I step back, you can feel that. But I think storytelling is so key, and I still believe that by sharing people's stories, maybe you can find some kind of connection with the public.
Journalists have been, a very significant target in this so-called drug war, and I'm wondering what you think the role of journalism is in countries like Mexico, especially since many journalists do this work at, at great risk to their own personal lives. And I mean, how that differs from journalism in the United States, given that you've reported for a lot of fine newspapers in this country.
It's like most killings in Mexico. I mean, if you kill someone in Mexico, 95, 98% of the time, you're going to get away with it because the impunity is so high. Mexico is now one of the most dangerous countries to practice journalism. Right after, I think it's Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Mexico is really not at war. So that kind of gives you a sense. I write about the death threat that I received in Midnight in Mexico, but whatever danger I face really pales in comparison to what my colleagues in Mexico face. I mean, their murders will probably never be solved. You know, you travel into parts of Mexico that we call now zones of silence, because no one will say anything. I mean, there are times when I will go to a community and I will pay a norteño group to sing corridos so I can get a sense of what is, you know what a corrido is, right?
It's like a ballad or a song.
It's like a ballad, like a tale of someone. But it's kind of a way to get a sense of what is really going on in the community. You know, who's in charge, who are the people that we should be aware of. Because most journalists are just too afraid, for good reasons, you know, not to publish certain stories or write about certain things. And unfortunately, those zones of silence used to be mostly along the U.S.-Mexico border or Texas border, but it's now in the interior of Mexico. And that's not changing anytime soon. I think that in the last couple of weeks or so, 2 other journalists were killed in Mexico.
So, I mean, we talked about this earlier in our lunch discussion, but Americans, especially American popular culture, I mean, loves violence, and they tend to want to learn about the drug trade through shows like Narcos and things that they can binge watch, and documentaries that they can do the same. And I think in some ways the national media runs parallel to that, in the sense that they want to swoop in and put on CNN only when these kind of crises occur. And I'm just wondering what you report about in the in-between times when, I mean, if all is quiet or when all is quiet, what do you report on, and what do you talk about when things are quieter that we need to know about, and how do you kind of sell these stories to your editors when they're not breaking news?
I am currently working on a story about Cancun. So if anyone has any plans to go to Cancun anytime soon, please raise your hand. I need a quote from a Texan. Jennifer was great to let me talk about her experience in Cancun. But it's really strange. It's really strange, because if I write about migration, I am sure to get at least a dozen emails the next day. Just, the hatred and
So nastygrams?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
very nasty. The nativism, the xenophobia. I mean, that's going to come out. But if I write a story about violence in Mexico, I get the opposite reaction. Oh, tell me more, give me more. And I'm very conflicted about this, because Midnight in Mexico has been auctioned for a movie or a series. Last thing I heard is some big company is looking at it, and I don't know how to feel about that. I don't know if that maybe I'm just contributing to this fascination in the United States about violence and death and narcos. I mean, Mexico has tried to ban corridos. They ban the music that sort of glorifies the narco, the drug traffickers, because they feel like it's the influence is so much that for a young population, to continue this. In Sinaloa, I mean, you go to the grave sites. Sinaloa is really the capital of the narco world, and you go to the grave sites and you have these ¿cómo se dice? Mausoleums that are built to honor someone. Big enough that in some you will have a car, the person's favorite vehicle there, and so forth. And the government has been trying to fight against that, against glorifying the narco culture. But when you have, workers who make less than $100 a week, $80 a week, $70 a week, it's not that difficult to recruit them. And I mean, it's the same thing in the United States, the telenovelas and the whole narco series that you see on Netflix and other. I mean, it's all there. How do you fight that? I'm not really sure, but it's not working.
What is the scope? I mean, based on and so we have two more questions here, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. So if you are interested in submitting a question, please, we're about to open the floor here, and just make sure and do that through the QR code in your device. But one thing that I know that you report on is the scope of the drug trade and how it infiltrates into U.S. communities. And I'm wondering if because you have talked about earlier the fact that you have these cities that have at times incredible violence like Ciudad Juarez, but then the twin city on the other side, El Paso, is one of the safest cities in the United States. And I'm just wondering, what is the scope of, but then you have, and just to add on, Chapo Guzman saying that most of the drugs are crossing at legal crossing points. I mean, they're not being smuggled through in the middle of the night.
Or submarines.
Or submarines, or submarines. But what is it how active are drug cartels in the United States, and in U.S. communities? And what is their reach inside the United States?
That is, again, self-criticizing as journalists. I think we give the impression that this kind of happens magically, that the drugs just come over the border in a magical way, and somehow they hit Cleveland or Michigan, LA, New York, Dallas. But the reality is that the reach of the cartels, the people who are usually smuggling on the U.S. side are Americans. The headquarters of the Zetas, again, the Zetas is a fascinating story because this is a paramilitary group made up of soldiers who were originally trained by the U.S. government, and they were trained to take on the cartels. What does the leader of the cartel in the Gulf cartel across the border from Brownsville? What does he do? Instead of scaring him, he reaches out to one of them and says, "Well, how much are you getting paid?" And he doubles the pay. And he says, "Can you recruit more people, especially those who are trained by the United States government, because I like to build my own little empire," and thus the Zetas came about. The Zetas operation in the United States is in Dallas, Texas. That's where the warehousing, that's where the distribution center is. The other big place is Chicago. So it's, the tentacles are all over the United States, all over the world, basically. It doesn't really stop at the U.S.-Mexico border. It's something that I think as journalists we fail to maybe write more about, and we give the impression that it's this corrupt little country south of the border that's the villain. But really, especially during COVID, we saw the rise of American teens, for example, being recruited by the cartels to go to the border, and now it's not just bringing up drugs, but really helping them with human smuggling. You have a lot of kids, for example, in El Paso or in Presidio and other places where they're below the age of 18, so they don't really face serious jail time. They're there, they're driving, they're picking up people in the trunks. We've seen all these accidents that have happened on I-90 or I-54 between Van Horn, Marfa, Van Horn, New Mexico. A lot of it is happening because, again, the cartels know how to recruit, and they know how to recruit the right people. Elderly Americans, I mean, there was a big story about the American from Michigan who retired, wasn't really making it on Social Security, American who would go to the border, help pick up drugs, bring them up north. Again, American teens. It's not black or white. It's not, that's on the southern side of the border. I mean, you need both sides to cooperate or for the business to really work, to really be successful. We just did a story a few weeks ago about the Zetas and their headquarters in Dallas and the places they live, which is right outside Dallas, right in Mesquite, Texas.
Okay. So one last question I wanted to wrap up with here before we open it up to your questions is, why, Alfredo, do you think that the idea of a border wall, whether it be how President Trump invoked it or how it's very powerful to many Americans, I mean, why do you think it's so politically and rhetorically powerful from an American perspective?
It symbolizes the fear of the demographic changes in this country. It really plays into the fears of Americans who feel that they're losing their country. It doesn't go unnoticed that in El Paso, the weeks leading up to this massacre at Walmart, there was a big effort on YouTube, on GoFundMe, to build a private wall. And the sense was that the U.S. government is not doing it, we need to do it. I mean, they raised $21 million for that effort. And so for weeks, you had the build a wall rhetoric on and off. I mean, all throughout social media. And what does this alleged killer say? I came to stop the invasion of Texas. I mean, it symbolizes, and I write about it in Homelands, a sense that America is changing, and that we have to keep that America. And again, I go back to 1994 when NAFTA, when we felt that as border people, we were going to be the bridge for two countries, and that obviously that message never really got out.
Please send us your questions. I mean, we have a good list to work through, but we're interested to hear your questions out in the audience. And I mean, the first one is one in which, since President Biden came in, I mean, some would accuse him of sending mixed messages about whether or not migrants, should come, and we've seen an escalation of migration at the border since he came into office. And then he notably appointed VP Harris to kind of lead some of these issues. And one question that was submitted here, no name, but feel free to submit a name if you would like to be recognized, is what is your opinion of VP Harris's role on border issues and Central American migration? I mean, was she the right person to appoint?
Well, I'm the last person to answer that question, whether she was the right person. But I would agree that there has been some mixed messaging from the Biden administration. Going back to the Haitian situation, the message was we're going to deport everyone back to Haiti. And the truth is that thousands of them did come across. I mean, I think there's a real disconnect between reality and fiction. I mean, the truth is, when I'm interviewing people along the border, whether it's Chiapas border, with Guatemala, or it's the U.S.-Mexico, mostly the Texas-Mexico border, and I'm interviewing migrants, the vast majority of them have a piece of paper that says, this is where I'm going. I'm going to Nashville, I'm going to Carolina, I'm going to New York, and they have a name of an employer who is going to hire them. I mean, most of the people who are coming because they have jobs waiting for them in this country. I mean, there's a massive labor shortage in this country. And so there's this disconnect, I mean, I think the last president who really made an effort to to have immigration reform was George W. Bush and Vicente Fox. And you know, it just kind of tells me as a reporter that there's a real need to have some kind of reform and to deal with the labor shortages in this country. I mean, my father came as a bracero. I mean, my father was a guest worker. I would not be at the Bush School today if my father had not been someone who was welcome in the 1950s to come here as a guest worker. And through that program, he legalized, got his green card, brought his kids across the border, and we got an education. I mean, that's the story that when I'm interviewing people along the border, I mean, that doesn't escape me. I don't find immigrants who are saying, well, I'm trying to see if maybe I can find a job somewhere. I mean, they come with jobs awaiting them. That's the reality. Whether Vice President Harris is not the right, I mean, that's politics. And one of the things I was telling Dr. Teague in her class earlier was that as journalists, I think we have a big part in this mess, in this debate, because we're no longer just journalists anymore. I mean, people looking for the facts. It's a lot of journalists, you know, who are coming with an agenda, and they're promoting this side or that side. And I think that's really has muddied the waters over the last few years.
Violence against women, femicide, has been a huge issue. You know, that runs through the violence that's been coming out of Mexico, and we've become a lot more aware of that in recent years, as you know, came up with a lot of attention given to it on David Shirk's recent report. Why do you think that it's such an issue in Mexico?
Because it's a symbol again of Mexico's weakness. Mexico rule of law weakness. I mean, that's really how I was able to, for the longest time in my career, my role, my passion was to cover migration. My passion was to cover the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Then I discovered Cuba, and it was covering Cuba, Washington, etc. But when I started covering the women of Juarez and Ciudad Juarez, that gave me a real peek into the underbelly of Mexico, into, you know, the rotten corruption that's in Mexico, and their inability to solve some of these murders. I mean, many of these were clearly innocent women who were, you know, picked up by a group or individuals. The story that really began when I knew that I gotten in the when the cartels were not very happy with me, was the first story we worked on the women of Juarez, and we basically publicized the name of this organization in Ciudad Juarez called La Línea, and we said the group that's responsible for a lot of these murders of women in Juarez is a group called La Línea. They were the hitmen for the Juarez cartel. I mean, that began like this whole odyssey over the last 15, 16 years of, you know, having to switch from covering diplomacy and migration to essentially covering organized crime in Mexico. And at the time, it was mostly Ciudad Juarez where this feminicide phenomena was happening. Now it's really throughout the country, and even, you know, into Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, etc.
A question I receive a lot, and I'd be curious for your thoughts, and this was also one of the questions submitted, is when drugs are regulated or legalized, well, particularly marijuana, if marijuana is legalized in the United States or regulated so that, you know, can be consumed recreationally, what will this do to, you know, the cartel's center of gravity in any way, or their business?
I mean, we're already seeing this. When Colorado legalized marijuana, two things happened. The cartels went into other operations. I mean, I once had a joke that if they suddenly legalized marijuana and cocaine, you know, would the cartels finally take a break? and go to Cancun or go to the beach and kind of
Hang
relax.
out, yeah.
And and the story was the next day the United States decides to criminalize galletas Maria, the very popular cookies from Mexico, and then said, we're back in business. And that's when I remember when I said that joke the first time, I think I was talking about Midnight in Mexico, and the Mexicans kind of came at me and said, that's really ridiculous. But you've seen it over the last few years. I mean, it's no longer about drug trafficking. It's about kidnappings. It's about extortions. It's about threatening U.S. or investments from the United States. And so the other thing that's happened is the Sinaloa cartel, for example. They decided to find a way to compete with the marijuana that's coming from Colorado, because they think that marijuana from Colorado is so good that they have to find ways to make their product better.
Interesting. Well, I mean, to stay on the subject of specific drugs, I want to talk a little bit about fentanyl. And, fentanyl initially started coming from China. Now a lot of the products are being sent over to Mexico and produced by the cartels. And, many people get fentanyl or access to these types of drugs through the dark web, and they can get it through the post office or, through their own mail. And I'm just wondering, with the explosion of fentanyl, if you see changes being made to the drug trade and the cartel operations, and whether or not you think maybe the cartels will conform to get their product in through the mail.
Yeah, I mean, you're also seeing again the use of more American teams. I mean, even students who are in the backpack. I don't want to give the impression of all students, but there have been cases of some students bringing in the fentanyl. I mean, it's so easy to smuggle that that is happening more and more. I mean, you're seeing that. I mean, think of a cartel as a marketing firm, as a U.S. corporation. They're always looking for what the needs are, what the demands are. And when fentanyl came about, I mean, people just quickly switched to that drug, and thus, I mean, that's why that's part of the reason why you've seen such an explosion of smaller criminal groups throughout Mexico.
I want to take the conversation back to immigration, and I mean, we've talked a lot about security issues and the drug trade and the drug war, and your observations of drug cartels. But I mean, following Midnight in Mexico, 5 years later or 6 years later, you published Homelands, which is a book about immigration, identity, and becoming, and what it means to be Mexican American, which we talked about earlier. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what led you to write that book, especially following you spending so much time talking about issues of security and the drug war.
Before Midnight in Mexico, my original idea, my passion was to try to write a book like Homelands, was to try to write about the immigration experience, and to dedicate the book really to my parents. I mean, again, my father being a guest worker, my mother having worked in the fields in California, being a member of the Cesar Chavez Union. And in a broader scope, it really became El México de acá, the Mexico within the United States. To try to explain that Mexico with the central question of how do we fit in? How does this generation, this generation of immigrants, how do we fit in the broader mainstream of America? And that became the journey. I should say that the book, the research of the book, the writing of the book began long before then candidate Trump was on the trail, or when he called Mexicans rapists, murderers, etc. So part of my challenge in writing the book was not to make it so much about President Trump and his policies, the rhetoric, but really make it more about the experience of Mexicans trying to find the route that previous waves of immigrants found, whether it was the Germans, whether the Irish, the Italians, but where do the Mexicans come in? How do they become part of the mainstream of this country? And unfortunately, the book came out in 2019. The paperback came in 2020, right before the pandemic. And so I appreciate that I'm here at Texas A&M and I'm talking to the Bush School, because I think this is really my first talk to promote Homeland's.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that you had a class that was actually reading that.
We had a little book club discussion
Yeah.
today. It was wonderful. Do you think that, and a number of people have asked this question in different ways, but and perhaps it's a bit simplistic, but I also think it's also very complicated. Are drug cartels something that, you said that drug cartels, there was like 5 of them, and now there's like over 100 different groups. Mm-hmm. Do you think that are drug cartels, is there any way to make them go away? Or is there just are the solutions finding different ways to, rid them of power? I mean, is it too idealistic to think that we can do something that would actually eliminate drug cartels in Mexico?
If you ask the Mexicans that, they will say, well, the United States was able to kind of get control of the mob. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, the Guadalajara cartel, which is one of the original cartels in Mexico, I mean, there was a big influence from the Chicago mob, people who moved into either Mexico City or Guadalajara. So I think or even, the example of Colombia, where the cartels became weaker and weaker and weaker. And if you talk to American officials, they say, that's kind of the trajectory. That's kind of the end game, is to try to make the Mexican cartels become weaker over time. But again, unfortunately, I don't see that, because I don't really see a plan coming from the current administration in trying to build a rule of law, build institutions. So is it possible? Yes, it is. But I think it's going to take a long time before that happens.
I wonder if you can comment. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the hugs not bullets approach championed by López Obrador, the current president of Mexico. And I'm wondering if you could comment on how the Mexican citizens feel about this approach, demilitarization, I guess, if we want to call it that. And I mean, some people have even asked here in the sense of, like, in some of these areas with renewed violence, I mean, are people extremely pessimistic? Do they live in fear? I mean, what are their sentiments?
In the Dallas area and other parts of Texas, we're seeing a rise of, I mean, our focus has been Central American migration, and migration from South America, the Haitians, for example, the Cubans, Venezolanos. But one story that we don't, I think, write enough about is the number of Mexico's middle class that is leaving Mexico. And we're seeing big numbers of them in North Texas. López Obrador's popularity, I mean, if you look at the polls, he's around high 50s. He came in, I think it was, at one point it was over 80% of the population. So he's still a very popular president. But if you ask him about security, if you ask people about security, the vast majority of respondents will say Mexico is on the wrong course. And again, especially when you're looking at some of the traditionally safer areas of Mexico, it's really fascinating for me as a reporter to kind of look at the polls and look at reality and talk to people. I think they like López Obrador because, on the one hand, there's been no real proof that he's corrupt. There's a lot of allegations against certain members or even family members, but I think Mexicans they like the fact that he's not like his predecessors, where the rumors of corruption was so close, and they like that he's focused so much on the poorest in Mexico. But if you ask him specifically about security, you will find big disenchantment building, and that's building as we speak.
I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but I mean, nativist policies, I mean, still in some ways guide immigration and the U.S.'s role towards Latin American immigration. And I'm just wondering, with these issues that you're seeing and the waves of migrants at the border, especially in the last 5 to 7 years, do you think that the United States is truly invested on changing the narrative around Latin American migration, especially as compared to the migration of Europeans during the late 19th and early 20th century, and how the United States has received other migrant groups? Do you think that our country here is fully committed to changing that narrative around Latin American migration or migration from the global South?
That's a really, really, really tough question. I mean, obviously coming from El Paso and being invested so much in the immigrant groups, I don't see that narrative changing anytime soon. I mean, we spoke earlier in the class, and I said I really think that until Mexican Americans, Latinos, the others, it's not just Mexican Americans but other immigrant groups, until they really get active and participate in local elections and statewide elections, national elections, that narrative is not going to change. I mean, it's a convenient punching bag. The border has become one huge piñata, You just hit it and hit it and hit it, and you see political poll numbers go up, and you see campaign contributions go up, because there's really not much of a consequence to pay. And I think the new waves of immigrants have to learn from their predecessors. Again, going back to the Irish, going back to the Germans, going back to the Italians, how they were able to gain respect, and it was them becoming politically active. We've seen it growing over the years, and you don't, it's not about becoming a Democrat. I mean, it's just becoming active. I mean, Republican. I think once people become more active, and people know that they're going to pay a price at the voting booth, some of that rhetoric may change, but I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I mean, and this is just speculative here, but based on what you've seen in your work, and then also your research, especially in writing Homelands and working on migration, I mean, what do you think that the United States, should do as a immediate measure? I mean, should there continue to be this toleration of illegal immigration? I mean, it's very common to say we need to, that the United States, Washington needs to establish or have pave a path for legal citizenship. I mean, but right now, this is a mess right now, and there's a huge illegal immigrant population here in the United States. I mean, what types of measures do you think can be done, and just very broadly speaking, to start to get our government out of this mess?
I have a sense from talking to immigrants and just looking at the situation overall in our hemisphere, that it's only going to get worse, because you're coming from economies that were hit hard by the pandemic. I mean, we have to remind ourselves that the United States, very powerful country, has been able to sort of gain some kind of normalcy in this country. But if you look at a place like Ecuador, I mean, it was kind of interesting seeing the vice president going to Central America to look at the root causes of migration. But really, that's a very narrow focus, because if you look at what's happening in Colombia, Ecuador, and other countries, Haiti, obviously, Venezuela, I mean, it's, as I was talking to a Mexican official recently, I said, I want the Americans to understand what is happening globally, one thing, and that one of the economies with the fastest growth right now of creating jobs is the U.S. So more and more people are going to want to come to the U.S., and especially when they see that there are labor shortages, and when they see that there are jobs that are waiting for them. So I short of comprehensive immigration reform, I don't know that I see light at the end of the tunnel.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and we're kind of getting near our time here, we probably have about 2 to 3 more minutes, but the Biden administration has continued on with some of the Trump administration policies, especially the Remain in Mexico policy. I'm wondering, if you could share your thoughts about that.
It was basically the United States outsourcing the problem of immigration to cartels and to members of organized crime. And basically saying, we're not going to deal with this, so we're going to send you back to the border. And for members of organized crime, all of a sudden, this became a very lucrative situation, where you can bring people across. Plus the dangers that people face in some of these border communities on the Mexican side. It's also a reflection of reality in the United States. The Biden administration trying to sort of play both sides, and obviously in a city like Ciudad Juarez, where you have so many immigrants and shelters, I mean, the dangers that are posed, I mean, are great. I mean, you hear a lot of women who've been raped, people who've been assaulted, many killed. Yesterday, I think there was a bus that exploded somewhere in southern Mexico. I think 12, 13 migrants were killed. I think the way this is happening, I mean, you're seeing more and more cartels, more and more members of organized crime really becoming central characters in the migration. When I was a kid growing up in Durango, we knew who the smugglers were. I mean, it was your next door neighbor. It was someone that you trusted in that neighborhood. That's not today. I mean, today it's big, powerful cartels who are bringing people in because the more difficult. There's one anecdote. I was covering the migration issue many years ago when Senator Graham was still a senator from Texas. And I remember at a bar in San Luis Potosí where the U.S., and I forget what the act was, but the U.S. had just made it harder for Mexicans to migrate to the United States. And the people who were raising their glasses to toast to that were smugglers. Because the more difficult you make it on the U.S. side, the more profitable it becomes for members of organized crime. So that, I mean, and again, this is when Phil Gramm was a senator, and not much has changed since then.
Well, I wanted to end on a little bit of a maybe more cheerful note.
Cancun?
Cancun, obviously, it was spring break coming up in a couple months. But also, I mean, our students here in the International Affairs Department, many of them are going on into jobs that will have them working in overseas capacities in the State Department, intelligence services, and and that sort of thing. And I mean, countries like Mexico and countries throughout Latin America, in our hemisphere, face these kind of complicated legacies, historical legacies of U.S. intervention. But you've also observed the very positive aspects of being in these countries. And I wonder for people that want to learn more about these countries and study them and maybe make an impact one day in their careers, I mean, what do you say to students that are looking to maybe make an impact by working, in some of these countries, and they're interested in visiting Mexico, but they might not know, or they might hear about the security situation there? I mean, how would you recommend that they balance wanting to know and understand with also being realistic about the possible dangers?
I mean, there are going to be dangers, but there is such a benefit of being a U.S. citizen. I mean, and I know this firsthand, being a journalist, that I can go to certain communities, and I mean, when I cross the border into Mexico, the first thing I do is I take out my credentials. Let's say I'm a journalist for the Dallas Morning News. I have my State Department ID. I make sure that my passport, sticks out so people can see I'm a U.S. citizen. But I also think, from a perspective of Latin America and from Mexico especially, it is. This may sound like a cliche, but really, it's it's the young people, the young Americans, who represent the biggest hope for the hemisphere. As a way to kind of restore hope lost over the last few years. People who can maybe still be the beacon for this country. As a U.S. journalist, I remember talking to a lot of my Mexican colleagues and saying, we'll find a way to get through this. We'll find a way to U.S. organizations to come and help, and we're going to go out and take your plight across the border into the United States. And I remember in the last few years, that sort of happy talk just didn't really sit well with my colleagues in Mexico. I mean, they saw it as me wasting my time. I mean, I've had people ask me, would you still put your life on the line like you did during the last 10, 15 years? And I would say that at the last few years, I mean, I would look at some of these stories and some of these issues, and I just didn't think it was worth it. I mean, I didn't think that that my government would speak out on my behalf, would make sure that I was protected. And so when you look at the future, how to restore hope, I met a lot of the students today, and I can see in them, and I can feel that their stories, their sense of purpose, is going to change a lot of people's minds throughout Latin America.
Well, please join me in giving Alfredo Corchado a hand for coming to speak with us.
Thank you.